Today, my son finally deigned to make an appearance. I was sitting on the back porch of my house, watching the midday sun mercilessly dry out the last vestiges of life in my once lush garden, when I heard the sound of a car pull up. A silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. Aiden always liked to show off his wealth. 74 years of life had taught me that true wealth wasn't something to be flaunted, but my son must have missed the lesson. I was in no hurry to get up. Let him wait. Long ago, when Lucille was still alive, I would have run out to meet her, but much water had passed since then. My Lucille left this world 5 years ago, taking the last of my enthusiasm with her. "Dad, are you here?" Aiden's voice came from the front door. He never comes in the back porch for fear of getting his expensive Italian shoes dirty. "In the backyard," I answered without raising my voice. "If he wants to talk, let him bother to find me." When Aiden finally appeared on the porch, I couldn't help but notice that the years had taken their toll. At 46, he was already noticeably gray on his temples and shadows under his eyes. Financial analysis is a nerve-wracking job, as he often says, though I suspect it's more about his wife, Perry. "Long time no see," he began, shifting from foot to foot. "How are you?" "Alive, as you can see." I pointed to the chair beside me. "Sit down if you're not in a hurry." Aiden glanced back at his car, as if assessing whether it was worth wasting time on an old man. "Actually, I won't be long. Perry's waiting in the car. We have a meeting in an hour." "Of course, Perry." I could barely contain my sigh. "Well, tell me why you're here." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I'd recognize among 1,000. It was the way he always did when he was nervous or about to say something unpleasant. "Remember that piece of land on the edge of town? The one Grandpa left you?" I tensed up. The land Aiden was talking about had been in our family for 3 generations. Almost 20 hectares of untouched nature next to a developing area of Miramar. It had once been a worthless piece of land, but as the city expanded, its value skyrocketed. "I remember, of course. What about it?" "Well, I've been talking to Perry about something." He rubbed the back of his head again. "Miramar's going through a lot of development right now. This land could be a good moneymaker if it's sold to developers." I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Once upon a time, he had been enamored with the property, and we used to go fishing there together to the small lake that hid among the trees. He swore he'd never let those trees be cut down. "And then what?" "I just thought, we should talk about the possibilities. The real estate market's booming, and Perry says," I interrupted him. "What do you say, Aiden?" He looked away. "I think it's a sound financial decision. Don't you need that money? For medical treatment? For a comfortable old age?" I looked at my hands, wrinkled, with protruding veins, but still strong. The hands that planted trees on that very plot with my father. "My old age is quite comfortable. Thank you for caring. And I don't plan on dying anytime soon, if that's what you're worried about." Aiden sighed. "No one's talking about dying, Dad. It's just, these are assets that don't work. They could be useful." "Who?" "All of us. The family." I chuckled. The family, which consisted of me, Aiden, his wife Perry, and no grandchildren on the horizon. Perry was always too busy with her career to think about kids. "Let me think about it," I said finally. "This isn't the kind of decision that can be made in 5 minutes." Aiden nodded, clearly disappointed but not surprised. He knew that I wasn't the kind of man who gave up his family legacy easily. "Sure, Dad. Just think about it." When he left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the clouds. Something about this conversation kept me on my toes. In 30 years of teaching college economics, I'd learned to sense when students were understating or lying. Aiden was acting the same way. A week later, I was invited to dinner. Normally, I didn't eat at their house more than once a month. Perry couldn't stand my presence. But this time, the invitation came just a week after Aiden's visit. Their house was exactly what Perry would have chosen. Modern with cold, minimalist design and furniture that was uncomfortable to sit on. Every time I walked in there, I felt like an exhibit in a museum, old, time-worn, and out of place. But this evening was special. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I knew something was wrong. In the living room, I saw not only Aiden and Perry, but 4 other people I didn't know. "Oh, Dad," Perry smiled strainedly. She always called me Daddy. even though I'd repeatedly asked to be called by my first name. Here were meet my parents, Hugo and Daphne Caldwell, and my brother Prescott and his wife Violet. I shook hands with everyone. Hugo Caldwell was a heavy-set man with a keen eye and a firm grip. Daphne, a gaunt woman who looked like Perry, only older. Prescott was the exact opposite of his father, skinny with his running eyes and weak handshake. "Nice to meet you," I lied. Dinner was tense. I could feel everyone's eyes on me from time to time, as if they were studying an exhibit at the zoo. "So, Russell," Hugo began as we moved on to dessert, "Aiden's been telling us about your piece of land? Impressive." I slowly set my fork aside. "Is that so?" "Yes, it's a great fortune to have such an asset in the family," Daphne said, "especially now that Miramar is growing so much." "Oh, my husband and I do a little real estate investing too," she continued. "And if you decided to sell, we could help you find a reliable buyer." I shifted my gaze to Aiden. He avoided looking me in the eye, staring down at his plate. "Thank you for the offer, but I don't plan on selling," I said as calmly as I could. "Oh, but this is such a great opportunity," exclaimed Violet, Prescott's wife. "Land is frozen money, and money is supposed to work. My land works exactly as it should." I looked her straight in the eye. "It keeps my father's memory alive and gives oxygen to this town." There was an awkward silence at the table. "Dad was always sentimental," Perry laughed nervously. "But maybe there's a way to keep some of the area intact, like a park or a nature preserve. Yeah, and sell the rest for development?" I shook my head. "No, thank you." After that, the conversation moved on to other topics, but I felt the subject wasn't closed. They just backed off to regroup. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice strange things. Aiden called more often than usual, but the conversations were superficial. Perry suddenly started sending me invitations to family dinners every week. And every time her family was there, the Caldwells. They were polite, but I sensed something predatory lurking behind that politeness. I was especially alarmed by the scraps of conversation I overheard casually as I left the room. The signatures must be identical, otherwise, and the documents must be prepared in advance. One day I arrived early and heard Perry talking to his father. "We've got to move fast. He's not forever, and who knows what he'll decide to do with this land in his will." I went out quietly and rang the doorbell 5 minutes later, pretending I had just arrived. At dinner, I watched everyone closely. Perry was especially sweet, filling my glass with wine and inquiring about my health. "How's your memory, Dad?" she asked with feigned concern. "Don't you forget little things sometimes?" "My memory is perfectly fine," I answered. "I still remember the date we first met, April 7th, when you came to dinner with Aiden and spilled red wine on my Persian rug." Perry turned slightly pale. Aiden lowered his gaze. "After that evening, I decided to be more careful. Something was definitely going on, and it had to do with my land." Aiden had become increasingly aloof, avoiding direct conversation with me, and the Caldwells seemed to have become permanent residents of their home. I decided to check my ID. The old safe in my office held all the land papers, the will, and other important documents. When I opened the safe, everything was in place, but something didn't seem right. The folders weren't laid out the way I'd left them. Little things that no one but someone with my pedantry would have noticed. Someone was going through my files, and I was pretty sure who it was. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, pondering the betrayal that seemed to be ripening in my own family. Why is Aiden allowing this to happen? Is Perry's influence really that strong? Or is he himself actively involved in this? I remembered what my son had been like as a child. Honest, straightforward, a little insecure, but always striving to do the right thing. What had happened to that boy? My suspicions kept me in suspense. I began to notice how often Aiden and Perry whispered when they thought I couldn't see. How they shut up when I walked into the room. How the Caldwell family shows up at their house more and more often, as if preparing to take my place. Miramar in October is beautiful. It's like the city is covered in a golden blanket of fallen leaves, and the air smells of approaching winter. I used to love this time of year, the time when Lucille would pull out an old woolen blanket and we would sit on the veranda for hours, admiring the changing colors of nature. Now every fall is just a reminder that I'm alone. I was just about to drink my morning coffee on the veranda when the phone rang. Aiden's number. He'd been calling more often than usual lately, but our conversations were getting shorter and more superficial. "Good morning, Dad." His voice sounded strained. "Morning," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "Listen, Perry and I are thinking of having a little barbecue this weekend. Nothing fancy, just a family gathering. Will you come?" Family gathering. Aiden had taken on a whole new meaning with that phrase. Family now included the Caldwell clan, who were claiming that title more and more every day. "Who else is coming?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Pause. "Well, Perry's parents, her brother, and his wife, maybe a couple of friends. Maybe I'll stop by," I said, knowing I'd be there. Not because I liked the company, but because I didn't trust them and wanted to be in control. Arriving at Aiden's house on Saturday, I found that the small barbecue had turned into a full-blown party. There were at least 6 cars in the driveway, including Hugo Caldwell's massive black Cadillac. From the backyard came loud voices and laughter. The front door was unlocked, and I entered without knocking. There was no one in the living room, but there were papers on the coffee table that caught my eye. I walked closer. It was some legal documents. As I leaned over, I saw the title, Transfer of Ownership Agreement. The blood froze in my veins as I read the first lines. "Ah, Russell, you're here." Hugo Caldwell's voice made me straighten up. He was standing in the doorway, holding a glass of whiskey. "Everyone's in the courtyard. Join us." I nodded and headed for the back door, but my thoughts were far from the barbecue. Those documents, they had to do with a land transfer. My land? Out back, the party was in full swing. Aiden was at the grill flipping steaks, surrounded by 3 men I didn't know. Perry and her mother were hustling around the appetizer table, and Prescott and his wife Violet were entertaining a few more guests. "Dad!" Aiden spotted me and waved, but made no attempt to approach. I crossed the lawn slowly, feeling the stares of those present. It was a strange feeling, being an outsider in my own son's family. "Russell, I'm so glad you came." Perry approached me with a glass of wine. "Let me introduce you to our friends." The next half hour turned into a blurry carousel of faces and names. Perry introduced me to her boss at the real estate agency, a couple of clients she worked with, and a few other people whose names I promptly forgot. They all looked at me with the same expression, a mixture of polite interest and latent impatience, as if I were an obstacle to be bypassed. "How is your health, Russell?" Daphne Caldwell asked, sitting down at my table. "That's the most important thing at our age, isn't it?" "My health is fine. Thank you for your concern," I replied dryly. "And how are your real estate investments? Are you still looking for reliable buyers?" Daphne tensed slightly, but the smile didn't leave her face. "Oh, it's just a hobby. Hugo and I just like to keep up with the market. You know, when you retire, you have to do something." "Of course," I sipped from my glass. "It's amazing how much your family and I have in common. The same love of real estate, the same interests." "Indeed," Daphne adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. "We could learn a lot from each other." "I'm sure we could." Our conversation was interrupted by Hugo, who literally wedged himself between us, putting his massive hand on my shoulder. "Russell, let me steal your wife for a moment," he said with a strained smile. "Daphne, dear, Prescott is there to discuss something." Daphne got up hurriedly and left with her husband, leaving me alone. I saw them move to the far corner of the garden and start talking animatedly, glancing in my direction from time to time. Aiden didn't come to me until an hour later, when most of the guests were already seated at the table. "How are you, Dad?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "Surreal was some. I'm sorry I couldn't pay attention to you sooner. I had so much to prepare." "Nothing," I said, watching Perry whispering with Violet. "You've obviously got a lot on your mind, and a lot of new friends." Aiden followed my gaze. "These are Perry's co-workers and a few of our neighbors. Good people." "Are those papers on the coffee table in the living room related to good people too?" I asked bluntly. Aiden froze, his face going slightly pale. "What documents?" "The transfer of ownership, the ones in the living room." My son rubbed the back of his head nervously, a gesture I knew so well. "Oh, those are, Perry's work papers. She's running some deals right now." I knew he was lying. In 30 years of teaching college economics, I'd learned to recognize the lies in the eyes of students trying to explain why they hadn't turned in their homework. Sure, I said, deciding not to push. Working papers. Dinner took place in a strange atmosphere. I sat between two strangers who talked through me as if I were invisible. The Caldwells sat in the center of the table, an area that used to belong to me as the eldest member of the family. Now I was pushed to the periphery, physically and metaphorically. After dinner, as people began to break into groups, I slipped quietly into the house. I needed to take another look at those papers, but the coffee table was empty. The papers were gone. I decided to look around. Aiden's home office was on the second floor, a small room where he kept important documents. Climbing the stairs, I carefully opened the office door and stepped inside. The room looked like a hurricane had blown through it. The desk drawers were pulled out, folders strewn everywhere. Someone was clearly looking for something specific. An open laptop lay on the desk. The screen glowed, showing Aiden's email. I'd never invaded my son's privacy, but now the situation was exceptional. Leaning over, I saw correspondence between Aiden and someone named Courtney Sheffield. The subject line was land appraisal in the Oak Hills neighborhood. My land was located specifically in the Oak Hills neighborhood. I started reading the correspondence and the blood froze in my veins. Aiden was requesting an appraisal of the value of my land from a professional real estate appraiser. In the letter, he mentioned that the owner is elderly and does not fully understand the current market value, and that the family would like to settle this matter as soon as possible. Family. Did he mean the Caldwells? Or himself and Perry? Footsteps on the stairs made me back away from the computer quickly. I barely had time to step back to the bookcase when the door opened and Prescott Caldwell walked into the office. He froze when he saw me. Heckum. Oh, Mr. Hemmings, he said, clearly surprised. I didn't expect to see you here. And I didn't expect to see you in my son's office, I replied calmly. Looking for something specific? Prescott smiled nervously, his thin lips stretched in an unnatural grimace. Aiden asked me to bring him some papers, something work-related. Oh, yeah. It's odd that he asked you to do that and not me, his father who's in the house. Prescott shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Well, I'm more familiar with his filing system. We often discuss work matters. Of course. I took a step toward the door. I'll let you get out of my way. I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for. As I went downstairs, I ran into Perry. She looked excited. Oh, Daddy, there you are, she exclaimed with feigned joy. We've been looking for you. Dessert is served on the terrace. I just wanted to use the bathroom, I lied. Of course, Perry took my arm as if afraid I might run away. Let's get back to the guests. I didn't talk much over dessert, absorbed in my own thoughts. The Caldwells dominated the conversation, Aiden's occasional remarks, the guests laughing at Hugo's jokes. I felt like a ghost in this celebration of life. When I was about to leave, Perry insisted that I spend the night. It's late, Daddy, she said with a concern that seemed false to me. Stay. The guest room is always ready for you. I wanted to refuse, but something told me it was better to accept. Perhaps at night I could find more information about what they were up to. Okay, I said. Thanks for the offer. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. There were muffled voices coming from the living room. Aiden, Perry, and apparently Hugo Caldwell were still there. I opened the door to my room carefully, trying to hear their conversation. Son, we need to move faster, Hugo said. There's not much time. He's stubborn, it was Aiden's voice. I don't think he'll agree. Then we'll have to use an alternative plan, Perry said. We don't have a choice. I closed the door quietly, feeling a chill run down my spine. An alternative plan? What are they up to? In the morning, I woke up early and decided to check my bag before I left. To my horror, I discovered that my wallet was not where I had left it. Someone had gone through my things while I was sleeping. Opening my wallet, I was relieved to see that all the cards and money were in place, but something was wrong with the document compartment. My driver's license and social security card looked intact, but their positions were slightly altered. Someone was examining my documents, maybe even taking pictures of them. When I came downstairs, Perry was already in the kitchen making breakfast. Her parents must have stayed the night too. I could hear Daphne's voice from the living room. Good morning, Daddy. Perry greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How did you sleep? Not bad, I replied, deciding not to mention my discovery. But I should get home. Thank you for your hospitality. Oh, but you're staying for breakfast, right? I made your favorite blueberry pancakes. It was weird. I never told her my food preferences. And why would she care? I'm sorry, I don't. I have things to do at home. Perry looked disappointed, but she didn't insist. Aiden walked me to the car. Dad, he said when we were alone, I was wondering, have you thought about making a new will? Just to keep everything in order, you know? I looked at my son, the man I thought I'd known all my life. Now there was a stranger standing in front of me. My will is perfectly fine, Aiden, I replied coldly. Don't worry about it. He looked worried. I just want to make sure it's done right. You know, people my age often what? I interrupted him. Often victimized by greedy relatives? Aiden recoiled as if I'd hit him. Dad, that's not what I meant. I know what you meant, I said, getting into the car. And I know what's going on. Someone went through my bag last night, Aiden, and I have an idea who. Without waiting for him to answer, I started the engine and drove off, leaving my son standing in the driveway with a look of shock on his face. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that my own family was betraying me. The Caldwells were clearly up to something, and Aiden seemed to be completely under their influence. Or worse, willingly participating in their plans. When I got home, the first thing I did was check the safe. Everything was there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was under siege. The Caldwells had invaded my son's life, and now they were targeting mine. I spent the 3 days after the incident with my bag in the silence of my house, thinking about what had happened. The autumn rain drummed on the windows, providing a cozy backdrop for my unhappy thoughts. I went over the strange details of Aiden and Perry's behavior, the suspicious phrases the Caldwells had dropped, the documents I'd seen in their house. Everything indicated that they were up to something to do with my land. On the fourth day, the silence was broken by a phone call. I reluctantly picked up the phone, expecting to hear Aiden's voice with another insincere apology or invitation. Mr. Hemmings? The unfamiliar female voice sounded businesslike. This is Courtney Sheffield from Prime Estate. I'm calling about the appraisal of your land in Oak Hills. It took my breath away. The name was familiar. She was the one Aiden had been corresponding with. I didn't request an appraisal, I answered dryly. Oh, the woman was clearly embarrassed. But I have a request from your son, Aiden Hemmings. He said it was at your request. My son was mistaken. I have no intention of selling my land. I understand, she said with a hint of disappointment in her voice. But perhaps you'd at least like to know the current market value? It's gone up a lot in recent years and… No, I wouldn't, I interrupted her. And please don't bother me about it anymore. Have a good day. I hung up the phone, feeling the anger building inside me. Aiden was going behind my back, using my name without permission. It was out of line. Before I could gather my thoughts, the phone rang again. This time it was Aiden. Dad, hey, it's me, he said quickly, like he was afraid I'd hang up. Listen, we're having a family dinner tonight. It'd be great if you could come. Family? I asked bitterly. Are the Caldwells coming? Pause. Yes, Perry's parents would be coming. But that's okay, right? They're family too. I take a deep breath, trying to calm down. Aiden, I got a call from one Courtney Sheffield at the real estate office. Says you asked her to appraise my land on my behalf. There was a heavy silence on the line. Dad, I can explain. Then explain. Now. Aiden sighed. I just wanted to know the actual cost, so we all know what we're talking about. No one's going to do anything without your consent. Really? My voice turned ice cold. What about those deeds I saw at your house? And what about the man who went through my bag while I was sleeping? Dad, you've got it all wrong. Then explain it to me. Tonight, at your family dinner. I want to hear the truth, Aiden. Of course, he sounded relieved. Be there at 7. I'd been in and out of my head all day, going through the papers in the safe, checking the will, thinking about what I was going to say to my son and his family. By 6:30, I was ready for a confrontation. As I pulled up to Aiden's house, I noticed Hugo Caldwell's now familiar black Cadillac and several other cars. It looked like the family dinner had once again turned into a gathering of the Caldwell clan. I was greeted by Perry with a strained smile. Daddy, I'm so glad you came. She tried to hug me, but I pulled away. Where's Aiden? I need to talk to him. Perry frowned slightly, but quickly put a smile back on her face. He's in the kitchen finishing up dinner. Come into the living room. Everyone's already gathered. I'd rather talk to him alone, I insisted. Well, not now. Perry put her hand on my shoulder, trying to steer me toward the living room. Let's greet the guests first and then… No! I gently but firmly removed her hand. Now, this is important. I headed straight for the kitchen, ignoring her protests. Aiden was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He turned around when he heard my footsteps. Dad, you're early. We need to talk, I said, closing the kitchen door behind me. Alone. Aiden cast a nervous glance at the door. Maybe after dinner? I'm not done with… Now, Aiden. My voice was quiet but firm. What's going on? Why are you going behind my back? Why are you ordering an appraisal of my land without my permission? My son lowered his eyes, avoiding a direct stare. I'm just trying to help, Dad. You're not getting any younger, and I'm worried about the future. This land is a significant asset, and… So? You're going to dispose of it without me? I did my best not to raise my voice. Aiden, I've seen the deeds to your house. I've heard talk of signatures and alternative plans. What are you up to? Aiden looked cornered. It's not what you think, Dad. Perry just thinks it would be wise to have the paperwork ready in advance so that when you decide to… When I decide, I couldn't hold back now. Or when you decide for me. Who went through my bag, Aiden? Who was looking for my papers? No one went through your… The kitchen door swung open and Perry appeared in the doorway. Behind her, I saw the worried faces of Hugo and Daphne Caldwell. What's going on in here? Perry asked with feigned concern. We can hear everything in the living room. Good, I turned to her. Then you heard my question. Who went through my bag while I was sleeping in your house? Who was looking for my papers? And what was this alternative plan you were discussing with Hugo? Perry's face changed, the mask of welcoming hostess gone, giving way to cold calculation. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. No one touched your bag, and I don't have to report to you about my conversations with my father. Perry, please, Aiden tried to intervene, but she ignored him. You know what, Russell? Perry continued, her voice growing louder. Shannon, I've put up with you for years. Your constant nagging, your disapproval, your outdated views on everything. But now you're accusing my family of some kind of conspiracy? This is out of line. Perry, calm down. Aiden looked frightened. No, Aiden, she cut him off. I'm not going to be calm. Your father comes into our house and insults my parents, accusing us of some kind of shenanigans. And all because of what? Because of a piece of land that he keeps dead weight instead of letting us use it for the good of the family? I looked at this woman and did not recognize her as the man my son had lived with for almost 15 years. She was a predator whose true nature had finally come out. This isn't about land, Perry, I said quietly. It's about trust, about honesty. It's about family. Family? She laughed, and it sounded like breaking ice. What do you know about family? You were a terrible father to Aiden. Cold, demanding, never satisfied. And now that he finally has a real family, me and my parents who actually care about him, you can't stand it. Aiden looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. Perry, this isn't… No, honey, he needs to hear this. She kept her angry eyes on me. Your time has passed, Russell. It's our turn to live, to build a future. And you're just getting in the way. Am I interfering with your plans to take over my property? I asked you bluntly. Perry's face contorted with rage. Get out of here, she shouted, pointing at the door. Get out of our house. We don't need you. I stood stunned by the explosion. A small crowd had already gathered in the kitchen doorway, the Caldwells and a few other guests. They all looked at me like I was a leper. I shifted my gaze to Aiden. My son stood pale, his shoulders slumped, not saying a word in my defense. Aiden? I called out to him quietly. He looked up at me, eyes full of pain and confusion. I think… You should leave, Dad, he said, barely audible. This isn't a good time to talk. Those words hit harder than Perry's scream. My own son was choosing her side, betraying me. Okay, I said, feeling something snap inside. I'll leave. I walked slowly through the crowd, which parted in front of me like water. No one looked me in the eye except Hugo Caldwell, whose face was a look of ill-concealed triumph. As I passed through the living room, I noticed that plates had already been placed on the table. One of them was in my usual place. As soon as I left the house, there was a loud conversation and even laughter behind me. I turned around and saw through the window that Prescott Caldwell had taken my place at the table, and the others were seated around me as if nothing had happened. It was as if I'd never existed. The rain intensified when I went outside. I hadn't brought an umbrella, and the cold drops immediately began soaking my jacket. But I hardly noticed it. There was an emptiness inside me, the cold, endless emptiness of betrayal. I walked slowly down the street, thinking about how Aiden and I had gotten to this point. Where had I gone wrong as a father? When had I lost my son? Russell? Russell Hemmings, is that you? The voice calling my name sounded vaguely familiar. I turned around and saw a man about my age under a large black umbrella. I stared at his face for a few seconds, trying to remember. Arthur? Arthur Page? The man smiled broadly, showing a row of perfectly straight teeth, obviously expensive dental work. That's him. What are you doing here in this downpour? I'm soaked to the skin. Arthur Page was an old acquaintance of mine from my college days. We were never close friends, but we kept in touch. Then we went our separate ways. I went on teaching, and he went to work for the city government. Long story, I replied, trying to smile. Let's go under the umbrella, Arthur waved his hand. I live not far from here. Let's go in, have a hot drink, and talk. I haven't seen you in ages. I wanted to say no, but the prospect of returning to an empty house after what had happened was unbearable. Thank you, Arthur. That would have been nice. We walked under the same umbrella, and Arthur talked nonstop about his work in the municipality, his children, his grandchildren, his plans for retirement. I nodded at the right places, but my thoughts were still at Aiden's house, at the table where strangers had taken my place. Arthur's house turned out to be a cozy one-story bungalow with a spacious veranda and a well-kept garden. Inside, we were greeted by a pleasant atmosphere, a fireplace, soft armchairs, bookshelves. Sit down by the fire, Arthur said, pointing to a chair by the fireplace. I'll make us some hot tea, or would you prefer something stronger? Tea will be fine, thank you. While Arthur fiddled in the kitchen, I looked at the pictures on the mantelpiece. His children in graduation robes, his wedding pictures, his grandchildren. A happy family. Something I'd never had since Lucille's death. Here you go, Arthur returned with 2 steaming cups. Ha! So what were you doing in our neighborhood in this weather? I sighed, not knowing where to begin. But years of solitude had taught me to appreciate the rare moments of human contact. I was at my son's. Aiden. He lives 3 blocks from here. Oh, so you're Aiden Hemmings' father, Arthur exclaimed. I didn't know he was your son. I met him a couple times at the city hall. He came in with some questions about zoning. I got suspicious. Subdivision zoning? When was that? Arthur was thinking. About a month ago, maybe a little more. He came in with his wife and her father, I think. They were interested in the possibility of rezoning a parcel of land in the Oak Hills area for commercial development. My heart skipped a beat. Oak Hills, are you sure? Absolutely, Arthur nodded. That's the neighborhood I'm involved with. I remember being surprised by their interest because there were hardly any vacant lots. Most of it's been bought up by big developers. Except for my lot, I said quietly. Yours? Arthur raised his eyebrows in surprise. So it was your land they were asking about? That's odd. They said they were the owners. What? I almost dropped my cup. Owners? Arthur nodded, clearly puzzled by my reaction. Yeah, they brought some paperwork. I've seen a glimpse of them, something about a trust. To be honest, I didn't really look into it. It's not my area of expertise. They were referred to the property registration department. Arthur, I set my cup down on the table, trying to stay calm. That land belongs to me, only to me. I didn't put it in trust for anyone else. My old acquaintance looked genuinely surprised. Really? But they looked so confident, and the documents seemed to be in order. What kind of documents did they show? As I recall, it was a power of attorney or something like that. Arthur frowned, trying to remember. With your signature on it, I think. They talked about acting in your best interest because of, how did they put it? Due to the unstable health of the owner. I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just trying to manipulate me. They were actively going behind my back, forging documents and making me look incapacitated. Russell, are you okay? Arthur asked worriedly. You're pale. No, I'm not, I replied, trying to collect my thoughts. Arthur, this is serious. They're forging documents. I never signed any power of attorney, and there's nothing wrong with my health. Arthur looked shocked. Are you sure? That's a serious accusation, Russell. I'm absolutely sure. I looked him straight in the eye. Over the past few weeks, I've noticed strange behavior from my son and his wife, heard some suspicious conversations, found someone going through my personal belongings. And today I was actually kicked out of my son's house when I started asking questions. Arthur looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you, Russell, and I think you should go to the police. Forging documents is a criminal offense. You're right, I said, feeling the resolve building inside me. I won't let them cheat me, and I won't let them take what's rightfully mine. If you need me to, I can confirm that I've seen those documents, Arthur offered, and I can find out if they've already been registered. I have access to the municipal database. That would be a huge help. I looked at him gratefully. Thank you, Arthur. You're welcome, old boy. He patted me on the shoulder. You know, I've always told students that honesty and fairness are not empty words, and I'm glad to be able to help restore justice. I nodded, feeling anger flaring in my chest instead of emptiness. Anger at Perry and her greedy family. Anger at a system that allowed the elderly to be manipulated. And, most of all, anger at the son who had betrayed me for these people. But I wasn't the helpless old man they thought I was. I was going to fight, and the first step in that fight would be a visit to the police. Arthur Page's house became my refuge for the night. After everything I'd heard, I couldn't just go back to my place as if nothing had happened. Arthur had insisted that I spend the night at his place, said his guest bedroom was always ready for friends, and that the morning was the wiser. For the first time in many months, I felt that I was not alone in my struggle. The morning greeted us with clear skies. The rain had stopped, leaving behind fresh, clear air. Arthur and I sat at the breakfast table, discussing a plan of action. The first thing we need to do is to check how far the documents have gotten, Arthur said, pouring coffee into cups. I'll call my colleague at the registry office, see if they've received any paperwork for your precinct. And then the police? I asked, and stirring the sugar in my cup. Arthur rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Perhaps, but first we need proof. Right now it's your word against theirs. We need a lawyer, a good lawyer. I sipped my coffee, mulling over his words. A lawyer. I had an idea. You know, I had a student, Taylor Reed. Brilliant mind. As far as I know, she became an attorney and practiced here at Miramar. She specializes in property disputes. Arthur's gotten excited. Reed? Tall brunette with a short haircut? I met her at the city hall. She's got a reputation for being a bulldog in legal matters. Doesn't back down until she gets her way. That's her, I smiled weakly. She was the same in my class. Never gave up, even when the task seemed insurmountable. Great. Arthur pulled out his cell phone. I should have her number in my contacts. She recently prosecuted a case against a developer who tried to circumvent zoning in a historic district. While Arthur looked for the number, I thought about how strange life had gotten. My own son has betrayed me, but an old acquaintance and a former student can be my advocates. Sometimes help comes from where you least expect it. Here it is. Arthur handed me a cell phone with an open contact. Do you want to call right now? I glanced at the clock. It was early 9 in the morning. Probably too early for a business call. Let's check the information with the municipality first, and then we'll get in touch. Arthur nodded and dialed another number. Lisa? Good morning, this is Arthur Page. I apologize for the early call. Yeah, it's good to hear from you, too. Listen, I need your help. You know that precinct in Oak Hills that people were asking about the other day? The Hemmings precinct? Could you check to see if any paperwork came in for a change of ownership or trustee? He listened for a few minutes, nodding occasionally, then thanked her and ended the call. What did she say? I asked, feeling my muscles tense up. Good news, Russell. No changes to the registry yet. But, he held up a finger, they did file a request for a review of the property management transfer documents. The documents are being reviewed now. Lisa says there are some inconsistencies that have raised questions with the registrar. What kind of discrepancies? The signature. The registrar compared it to your signature on previous documents, and it seemed suspicious. Not identical. He deferred and asked for further verification. I breathed a sigh of relief. So the system worked after all, at least for now. We need to act fast, I said. They might try to work around the problem. Calling Taylor. Arthur handed me his cell phone, and I dialed the number. After the third ring, a woman with an energetic voice answered. Taylor Reed speaking. Ms. Reed, this is Russell Hemmings, your former economics professor at Miramar College. Pause. Professor Hemmings? There was surprise in her voice, and to my relief, warmth. What a surprise. How are you? To be honest, not very well. I decided not to waste time on pleasantries. I have a serious problem, and I need your professional help. It concerns an attempted misappropriation of my property. Taylor's voice became instantly businesslike. Tell me more about it. I summarized the situation, the suspicious behavior of Aiden and Perry, the talk about the documents, the confirmation from Arthur about the request to the municipality. I see, Taylor said when I was done. Sounds like attempted real estate fraud. Unfortunately, I often come across cases like this, especially when it comes to elderly owners of valuable real estate. Can you come to my office today? Say, at 11 o'clock? Sure, I looked at Arthur, who nodded, signaling that he could give me a ride. Great. The address is Elm Street, 23 Elm Street, office 305. Bring any land deeds you have and any other materials that may be relevant to the case. Thank you, Ms. Reed. I'll be at your office at 11. After the call, I felt better. A plan began to take shape. Arthur and I drove to my house so I could gather the necessary papers and change my clothes. My house greeted me with silence and coolness. I went straight to the study, opened the safe, and took out a folder with the documents for the land, the original ownership certificate, the plot plan, the cadastral extracts, my father's will in which he gave me the land. While I gathered the papers, Arthur scrutinized the photographs on the walls of my office. So, is that your father? He asked, pointing to an old black and white photo of a young man standing against a backdrop of trees. Yes, I stepped closer. That's him on the very land we're talking about. It was taken in 1948, when he first bought the property. And that's Aiden? Arthur pointed to another photograph of a boy of about 10 holding a fishing rod. Yeah, we used to go to the lake that's on the property. We'd fish. We'd make a fire. I stopped talking, feeling a lump in my throat. He loved that place. Swore he'd never let those trees be cut down. Arthur put his hand on my shoulder. People change, Russell. Not always for the better. I know, I put the papers back in my briefcase. But I never thought my son would change enough to commit fraud against his own father. Maybe it wasn't his idea, Arthur suggested. You said yourself that his wife has a strong influence on him. Maybe, I closed the briefcase. But that doesn't excuse him. We always make choices, Arthur. Always. By 11 o'clock, we were in Taylor Reed's office. Her office was in a modern office building in Miramar's business district. Minimalist design, austere furniture, and glass partitions all spoke of a successful practice. Taylor met us in the reception area. I barely recognized her. She had changed from a shy student with long hair to a confident woman with a short haircut and a penetrating gaze. But her smile remained the same, sincere and warm. Professor Hemmings, she shook my hand firmly. So when I'm glad to see you, though the circumstances are not the most pleasant. Likewise, Miss Reed, I smiled. And please call me Russell. I'm not a professor anymore. And I'm not your student, so call me Taylor. She turned to Arthur. Mr. Page, if I'm not mistaken. We met on a zoning case last year. That's right, Arthur nodded. You were quite impressive in your defense of your client's interests then. Taylor smiled and gestured us into her office. So, she began as we settled into the comfortable chairs, let's talk more about your situation. I understand that your son and his wife are trying to gain control of your land without your consent? That's right. I opened my briefcase and took out the documents. These are all the papers that prove my claim to the Oak Hills property. 20 acres of land my father bought in 48 years ago and willed to me. I've owned it for over 30 years. Taylor scrutinized the documents, occasionally making notes in her notebook. Everything is in perfect order, she said at last. Your title to this land is absolutely clear. Now tell me more about what happened. I started with Aiden's visit when he first talked about selling the land, and ended with the incident at his house yesterday and the conversation with Arthur. Taylor listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. And as far as I understand, she said when I was finished, you didn't sign any deeds of trust or title? Absolutely not, I confirmed. In fact, I've never even seen them. I'd only heard about them from Arthur. Mr. Page, can you describe exactly what you saw? Arthur went into detail about Aiden, Perry, and Hugo's visit to the municipality, the documents they had shown, and his conversation with his colleague at the registry office. Good, Taylor leaned back in her chair. The picture is clear. They're trying to make you look incapacitated by age or medical condition in order to gain the right to dispose of your property. It's a classic fraud scheme, unfortunately. We must act quickly and decisively. What do you suggest? I asked. First, Taylor began to curl her fingers. We will file a formal application with the Property Registration Office that any action on your property without your personal presence is illegal. Second, we'll arrange for a medical examination to confirm your full legal capacity. Third, we'll file a police report for attempted fraud. Do you think the police will take this seriously? I asked doubtfully. After all, this is my son we're talking about. Forgery is a felony, Taylor said firmly, no matter who commits it. But before we go to the police, we need to gather more evidence. Do you have any recorded conversations, messages, emails that might confirm your suspicions? I shook my head. Unfortunately, no. Only what I heard in person. What about your bag that you believe someone went through? Is there any way to check it for fingerprints? I doubt it's going to come up. It's been several days since then, and I've used the bag repeatedly. Taylor's thinking. We need more concrete proof of their intentions, something that directly links them to the forgery of the documents. Dutchum. What about the documents themselves at the municipality? Arthur suggested. If the signature is forged, that's proof. Right, Taylor nodded. But we need more than just a suspicious signature to start an investigation. A judge might say it's just a change in handwriting with age. I sighed. The situation seemed like a dead end. What if? I started, and that's when my cell phone rang. The number was an unfamiliar one. I'm sorry. I picked up the phone. Hello? Mr. Hemmings? It was a woman's voice. This is Courtney Sheffield from Prime Estate. We spoke to you the other day about your lot in Oak Hills. Yes, I remember, I answered, putting her on speakerphone and nodding to Taylor and Arthur. Mr. Hemmings, I'm calling because a strange situation has arisen, Courtney continued. After we spoke, your son called me and told me that you had decided to sell the property. He sent me the paperwork authorizing him to act on your behalf. But this morning I got a call from a potential buyer saying that he had spoken to you personally, and you claim that you are not going to sell the land. I'm a little confused. Taylor made a sign for me to keep talking. Ms. Sheffield, I really don't intend to sell my land, and I didn't sign any documents authorizing my son to act on my behalf. May I ask what exactly he sent you? It's a power of attorney, Courtney said. It says that you give your son the right to dispose of all your property in connection with, progressive age-related changes that make it difficult for you to make financial decisions for yourself. It's notarized, but now I'm not sure. Ms. Sheffield, Taylor intervened, my name is Taylor Reed, and I'm Mr. Hemmings' attorney. Can you forward us a copy of this document? And you are? Attorney? I'm authorized to represent Mr. Hemmings, Taylor said firmly, and we have good reason to believe that the document in question is a forgery. Pause. Yeah, of course, Courtney finally said. I'll email you a copy, but I must warn you that this is confidential information. Of course, Taylor dictated her email. Thank you for your vigilance, Miss Sheffield. You did the right thing by contacting Mr. Hemmings directly. After the call ended, Taylor smiled triumphantly. What a stroke of luck. Now we'll have concrete proof. If the signature on the power of attorney is forged and the notarization is bogus, we have every reason to go to the police. 10 minutes later, an email from Courtney arrived on Taylor's email account with an attached scan of the power of attorney. All three of us leaned over the computer, studying the document. Now that's chutzpah, I muttered, reading the wording. progressive age-related changes, difficulty in making independent decisions. I'm in better shape than half the people half my age. Look at the signature, Taylor pointed out. Is that your signature, Russell? I scrutinized the stroke at the end of the document. It was similar to mine, but with a distinct difference. Too smooth, too neat, without the characteristic slant I'd always made. No, it wasn't my signature. Someone tried to copy it, but not very skillfully. And the notary? Arthur pointed to the seal and signature at the bottom of the page. Cayenne Bishop, never heard of him. Taylor quickly typed the name into the search engine. Cayenne Bishop. There's no such notary on the state registry. It's a fictitious person. So, Taylor summarized, we have a forged document with a fake signature and a non-existent notary. More than enough to go to the police. But who's behind all this? I asked. Aiden wouldn't do something like this on his own. Based on your story, Taylor said, it's probably your sister-in-law and her family. The Caldwells, right? Yes, Perry and her parents. Especially Hugo Caldwell. He seems to be the mastermind behind the whole scam. Taylor nodded. It's a pattern. They convince your son that they're acting in your best interests, that you're becoming incompetent and need their help. Then they forge documents, gain control of your assets, and sell them, leaving you with nothing. But why would Aiden be involved in this? I still couldn't believe my son would knowingly go through with the deception. Pressure from his wife, financial difficulties, the promise of a share of the sale. There could be any number of motives, Taylor replied. But right now, our priority is to stop them before they do any real damage. And what do we do next? I asked. We'll prepare a police report with all the evidence, Taylor started typing on the computer. Then we'll go to the station and file it officially. I'll also prepare a statement to the prosecutor's office about attempted real estate fraud. It's a serious offense and the authorities will treat it accordingly. As I watched Taylor act with confidence and professionalism, I felt the anxiety of the last few weeks begin to recede. I had allies, people willing to help me fight injustice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Thank you both, and I said, looking at Arthur and Taylor. I don't know what I would have done without your help. Don't thank me, Taylor smiled. Your lectures on economic justice haven't been in vain. You always said the system only works when everyone gets what's rightfully theirs. I'm just helping to restore justice. And Arthur added, I just can't stand it when crooks try to cheat good people, especially if those crooks are the Caldwell family mafia. I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude toward these people. My own family may have betrayed me, but life had brought me together with those willing to stand on the side of truth. And with their help, I was determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine and hold those who had tried to deceive me accountable. After Taylor Reed's visit, events moved quickly. She wasted no time, and by the evening of the same day, she had prepared all the necessary paperwork to file with the police. Arthur and I went back to my house to gather additional materials, old letters with my signature on them, bank records, anything that could authenticate my handwriting. You know, Arthur said, helping me sort through the papers in the study, I keep thinking about what Taylor said, about Aiden's motives. What do you think? I asked, pulling another folder out of the cabinet. I think it's not just pressure from Perry. Maybe they're having financial problems that you don't know about. I paused, thinking. Aiden had never told me about the financial problems. On the contrary, he'd always displayed prosperity. Expensive cars, a big house, vacations abroad. But what if it was all just a facade? Maybe you're right, I said at last. I'll try to call him. Maybe he'll agree to talk to me straight. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Aiden's number. It kept ringing, but no one answered. After the sixth ring, the answering machine came on. I didn't leave a message and tried again. Same result. No answer, I said, putting the phone away. Probably sees that it's me and hangs up. Try mine, Arthur offered, holding out his cell phone. I dialed Aiden's number from Arthur's phone. This time there was an answer after the third ring. Hello? Aiden's voice sounded wary. Aiden, it's me, I said quickly, afraid he'd hang up. We need to talk. A pause. I could hear his breathing through the receiver. Dad, this isn't a good time, he finally said. After what happened yesterday. That's exactly why we need to talk, I interrupted him. Aiden, I know about the fake power of attorney. I know that you and Perry tried to sell my land through prime estate. Again, the pause, longer this time. Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. His voice sounded uncertain. Courtney Sheffield called me this morning, I continued. She sent me a copy of the power of attorney I supposedly gave you, with a forged signature and a fake notary. Dad, listen. He started, but that's when I heard Perry's voice in the background. Who is it, Aiden? Who are you talking to? It's, no one, honey. Just a customer. Give it to me. I heard a rustle as if the phone had been snatched out of my hand. Hello. Now it was Perry's voice, cold and harsh. Who's this? Hello, Perry, I said calmly. It's Russell. I wanted to talk to my son. I told you yesterday not to bother us, her voice was full of venom. Aiden doesn't want to talk to you. Not now, not ever. Let him say it himself. I tried to stay calm, even though I was seething with anger inside. I'm his wife, and I know what's best for him, Perry said. Now stop following us, or we'll be forced to take action. What kind of measures, Perry? Like forging my signature on a power of attorney? There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Perry spoke in a low, threatening tone. I don't know what you're imagining, old man, but I advise you to stop. You're only hurting yourself. We tried to help you, but you've ruined everything with your paranoia. I want to talk to Aiden, I insisted. No, then tell him I've gone to the police. I have proof of fraud. Perry laughed, but there was nervousness in her laugh. No one's going to believe you, Russell. You're an old man with advancing age changes, forgetting what you signed and what you didn't. It's your word against ours. Who do you think they'll believe? My word plus evidence of forgery, plus independent expert testimony. The police will be at your place tonight. You're bluffing, but I could already hear the uncertainty in her voice. Check, I replied and ended the call. Toward evening, Taylor called. All the paperwork is ready, she said. I've consulted with an expert graphologist, and he confirmed that the signature on the power of attorney doesn't match your handwriting. I also checked with a notary public, Kyan Bishop, who is not on our state's notary registry. We have everything we need to file a police report. Great, I said. When can we do it? I've already made an appointment with Detective Morrison from the fraud squad. He's ready for us in an hour at the Central Avenue station. The police station was a modern 3-story glass and concrete building. Detective Morrison, a tall middle-aged man with an attentive gaze, met us in his office. We spent the next hour explaining the situation in detail. Taylor presented all the evidence she'd gathered, a copy of the forged power of attorney, samples of my real signature, the report of the expert graphologist, Arthur's testimony about Aiden and Perry's visit to the municipality. Indeed, there is every reason to believe that there has been an attempted fraud, the detective said finally. We'll be sure to launch an investigation. How soon can you take action? I asked. I can send officers right away, the detective replied. Where are the persons involved in the case? At my son Aiden Hemmings's place, 42 Maple Alley. The others involved should be there as well. His wife Perry and possibly her parents. Okay, the detective nodded and picked up the phone. I'll contact the patrol officers and send them to this address. Do you want to be present for the interview? I glanced over at Taylor. She nodded slightly. Yes, I answered. I think it's necessary. The drive to Aiden's house seemed endless. I stared out the window of the police car and thought about how we'd gotten to this point. How come instead of a family dinner, we now have a police investigation? It's going to be okay, Russell. Taylor, who was sitting next to me, put her hand on my shoulder. We'll get justice. When we pulled up to Aiden's house, a patrol car was already there. 2 police officers were waiting for us in the driveway. We went to the door. Detective Morrison rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door was opened by Aiden. When he saw the police officers and then me behind their backs, he turned pale. What? What's going on? He mumbled. Mr. Aiden Hemmings? The detective asked, showing his badge. I'm Detective Morrison from the fraud squad. We have a few questions for you and your wife. Aiden stood as if paralyzed, unable to answer. Perry's voice came from the back of the house. Aiden, who is it? She appeared in the hallway and froze when she saw the police officers. What's going on? Her voice sounded tense. Why are the police here? Mrs. Hemmings, the detective stepped forward. We're investigating a report of attempted real estate fraud and forgery. We need to ask you some questions. Perry shifted her gaze from the detective to me and back again. her normally flawless face contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. "It was you," she hissed, glaring at me. "You really did it. Called the police on your own son." "I tried to talk to him," I replied calmly. "You wouldn't let me." When we entered the living room, I saw that Hugo and Daphne Caldwell were sitting at the table, as well as Prescott and his wife Violet. It looked like we had interrupted another family dinner. The table was set, glasses were filled with wine, and plates were full of uneaten food. "What's going on here?" Hugo Caldwell rose from the table. "Who are these people? Why are the police here?" "Mr. Caldwell, I presume." Detective Morrison turned to him. "We're here on a fraud case. We have reason to believe that you and members of your family are involved in an attempt to misappropriate a piece of land belonging to Mr. Russell Hemmings." Hugo tried to keep a cool face, but I could see his hands trembling. "There must be some mistake," he said. "We didn't embezzle anything. It was done legally and with Russell's consent." "In that case," Taylor intervened, "you won't mind a few questions. For example, who is the notary, Kean Bishop, who certified the power of attorney on behalf of Mr. Hemmings?" Perry and Hugo exchanged quick glances. "Yeah, I don't remember the details," Hugo mumbled. "It was just a regular notary. We found him through the internet." "Interesting," Taylor said. "Because there's no Kean Bishop in our state's notary registry. It's a fictitious person." There was a heavy silence in the room. I looked at Aiden, waiting for his reaction, but he stood there with his eyes down, not saying a word. Perry's face went dead pale as the detective began to read her rights. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. All her self-assurance and arrogance vanished in an instant. Hugo Caldwell tried to intervene, saying something about it being a misunderstanding, but the detective was adamant. When the police began to ask specific questions about the forged documents, Perry interrupted them sharply. "I demand a lawyer. We won't answer questions without an attorney." "That's your right," the detective nodded. "But I must warn you that the investigation will still be ongoing. And in light of the seriousness of the charges, we may seek a search warrant for this house." I could see the shock and fear slowly changing in Perry's eyes as she realized the reality of the situation. She really could be under criminal investigation. Her perfectly orchestrated plan was crumbling before my eyes. "Aiden," I spoke directly to my son, "you can explain now, before it gets worse." My son finally looked up. They were a mixture of shame, fear, and despair. "Dad, he started, but Perry interrupted him sharply. "Shut up, Aiden. Don't say a word without a lawyer." "Mr. Hemmings," the detective turned to Aiden, "if you decide to cooperate with the investigation, it will be taken into account in determining your degree of guilt." "Don't listen to him," Perry hissed. "They can't prove anything." "On the contrary," Taylor countered, "we have more than enough evidence to launch a criminal prosecution." Perry looked at all of us with undisguised hatred. Her perfect image of a successful woman was falling apart, revealing her true face: calculating, greedy, willing to do anything for money. At that moment, I realized that I might have lost my son forever, not because of his betrayal, but because of my reaction to it. I could have tried to talk again, to give him a chance to explain himself. Instead, I brought the police to his house. But there was no choice. I had to protect myself and my property. And if the price of that protection was a permanent break with my son, I had to pay it. The week after the police visit to Aiden's house was a blur. I had to visit the police station several times, give statements, meet with the prosecutor. Taylor had been there every step of the way, guiding me through the maze of legal procedures with the confidence of someone who was at home in that environment. "The case is moving quickly," she told me during our meeting in her office Thursday. "The prosecutor believes there is enough evidence to indict everyone involved in the scheme." "All of them?" I asked, thinking of Aiden. Taylor looked at me understandingly. "The degree of guilt varies. Hugo Caldwell and Prescott seem to have been the organizers. Perry was actively involved. Aiden," she paused, "his role is smaller, and if he continues to cooperate with the investigation, he might be able to avoid serious punishment." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. On the one hand, I didn't want my son to go to prison. On the other, the very fact that we were discussing his potential punishment was surreal. "Had you talked to him?" Taylor asked cautiously. "No," I shook my head. "Not since that day." "Maybe you should. she suggested it. Not as plaintiff and defendant, but as father and son. Maybe now that the truth is out, he's ready for an honest conversation. I've been thinking. The thought of meeting Aiden gave me mixed feelings. The anger hadn't cooled yet. The disappointment was too deep. But still, that was my son, my only child. Maybe you're right, I said finally. I'll think about it. Saturday morning, I gathered my resolve and called Aiden. The conversation was brief and awkward. He agreed to meet me at a neutral place, a small cafe downtown, far from his house and mine. I arrived before the appointed time. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the passers-by, ordinary people going about their ordinary business, unaware of the drama playing out around them. Aiden was 15 minutes late. When he walked into the cafe, I barely recognized him. The droopy face, the dark circles under his eyes, the sloppily buttoned shirt. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Hi, Dad," he said, sitting down across from me. "Hello." I scrutinized his face, trying to read his thoughts. "You look tired." "The last week has been difficult." He tried to smile, but it was unconvincing. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." "You're my son," I replied simply. "No matter how angry or disappointed I am, I'll always listen to you." Aiden lowered his eyes, examining his hands. "I don't know where to begin," he said quietly. "Oh, how to explain what I don't fully understand?" "Start with the truth," I suggested. "When did all this start? When did you and Perry decide that my land was the solution to your problems?" Aiden took a deep breath. "It started about a year ago. Perry and I had invested heavily in a real estate project, an apartment complex on the west side of Miramar. Everything looked secure, the paperwork was in order, the prospects were bright. We took out a big loan against our house. But then we found out there were crooks behind the project. They collected money from a few dozen investors and disappeared. "Why didn't you come to me then?" I asked. "I would have helped in any way I could." Aiden grinned bitterly. "Pride, I guess, or fear of looking like a loser in your eyes. You've always been so impeccable at everything, especially in financial matters. And I screwed up big time." "I'm not perfect, Aiden," I shook my head. "No one is. And I would never judge you for a mistake, even a serious one." "I realize that now," he looked up. "But back then, Perry and I were desperate. The bank was threatening to foreclose. The creditors were pushing. That's when she started talking about your land. At first, she just offered to ask you to sell it to help us out. I refused for a long time, but then I agreed to at least talk to you about it." "I remember that conversation," I nodded. "You came to me and started from afar." "Yeah," Aiden blushed with embarrassment. "I couldn't be honest even then. When you said no, Perry was out of her mind. She started talking about how you were an old selfish man who preferred a piece of useless land to the welfare of his own son. She made it sound like we were asking for your help and you were refusing." "And when did the idea of forging documents come up?" I asked bluntly. Aiden sank deeper into his chair, as if trying to disappear. "It was Hugo's idea, her father's. He came to us when he heard about our problems. At first, I thought he just wanted to help, to be supportive. But then he started asking about your assets, about the land. And gradually the conversation turned to the fact that you are of age, that it is difficult for you to manage such a valuable asset, and that it would be wise for us to take over. To sell it and pay off the debts," I added. "Yes," Aiden admitted. "I resisted the idea at first. But Perry and her father, they're very persuasive. They said it was for your own good, that we'd leave you some of the money from the sale anyway, that you weren't even using the land. And gradually I began to see it as the solution to all our problems." The waitress brought coffee for Aiden. He stirred it, but didn't take a sip. "Who forged my signature?" I asked. "Prescott," Aiden answered without hesitation. "He used to work in advertising, and he can imitate handwriting. Hugo got a sample of your signature out of some old papers, and Prescott practiced for days before he signed the power of attorney. And the notary seal? Hugo set that up too. He has a friend who makes seals. They created a fictitious notary because the real one would deny the authorization." As I listened to these confessions, I couldn't believe how elaborate the whole scheme was. It was not a spontaneous decision, not a desperate move. It was a calculated, cold-blooded plan. You know what strikes me the most? I said, looking Aiden in the eye. It's not the attempted fraud. It's that you let these people manipulate you, use you against your own father. What happened to that boy who swore he'd never let the trees on our land be cut down? Aiden looked away. He grew up and became a weak man, he answered quietly. A man who was more afraid of upsetting his wife than betraying his father. I'm not proud of myself, Dad. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside the window, ordinary life was going on. People were going about their business, laughing, talking, unaware of the drama playing out a few meters away. What will happen next? I finally asked. With the investigation? With Perry? With you? Aiden ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was in a quandary. The investigation is ongoing. I'm cooperating with the prosecutor's office, told them everything I know. They promised to take it into account when determining the punishment. Perry, he stalled. Perry hired a lawyer, an expensive lawyer. She's pleading not guilty, claiming she was the perpetrator and her father was the real mastermind. What about your marriage? I asked the question that interested me the most. After everything that had happened. Aiden was silent for a long time before he answered. I don't know, Dad. Honestly, we haven't talked much the last few days. She's mad at me for testifying against her family. She says I betrayed her. What do you think? I asked her. She used you, manipulated you, dragged you into a crime, and you still think you should be faithful to her? It's complicated, Aiden rubbed his face with his hands. We'd been together for almost 15 years. It wasn't all bad. There were good times. And then, where am I supposed to go? The house is mortgaged, the money's gone, my reputation is ruined. Even if I decide to leave her, what then? You could start over, I suggested. You're not that old, Aiden. You're only 46. You've got your whole life ahead of you. He looked at me with a sad smile. Starting over. It sounds scary and exciting at the same time, but I'm not sure I have the strength. I wanted to tell him that he could count on my support, that I'd help him get back on his feet, that we'd get through this crisis together. But something stopped me. Perhaps the fear of being disappointed again, or the realization that everyone has to make their own choices and take responsibility for them. You need to decide what you really want, I said instead, and who you want to be in this life. Aiden nodded, but I could see the uncertainty and fear in his eyes. We finished our coffee in silence. When it was time to say goodbye, Aiden awkwardly held out his hand to me. Thanks for meeting me, he said. I'm sorry for everything. I shook his hand, feeling strangely distant, as if I were saying goodbye to a distant acquaintance, not my own son. Take care of yourself, I said. He nodded and walked out of the cafe, hunched over as if carrying a heavy burden on his shoulders. 2 weeks passed. The investigation was progressing, and the case was getting ready to go to trial. Taylor kept me informed of the details, but I felt increasingly detached. The land was safe, my rights restored. The rest didn't matter so much anymore. On Wednesday, I got a call from Arthur. Russell, have you heard the news? He asked excitedly. What news? About your son and his wife. They gave a press conference this morning. I saw the report on the local news. A press conference? I was surprised. About what? They announced that they're staying together despite the allegations. Aiden said he stood by his wife and believed she was innocent, that it was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I felt something snap inside. After our conversation, after all the confessions, Aiden still chose her side. Are you there? Arthur asked after I'd been silent for a long time. Yes, I answered. Just thinking about this information. I'm sorry, Russell. I know you were hoping he'd make the right decision. It's okay, I said, even though nothing was okay. It's his choice. He's a grown man. After talking to Arthur, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the pictures on the wall. A young father with his young son fishing, a teenager at his high school graduation, a young man with his fiancée, a family chronicle capturing happy moments. But what are those smiles in the pictures worth if there's no real connection, no real loyalty behind them? Taylor called this evening. Did you see the news today? She asked cautiously. Arthur told me, I answered. Aiden and Perry gave a press conference declaring their support for each other. Yeah, Taylor sighed. That complicates matters. If Aiden retracts or changes his statement, Some of our evidence could be called into question. Could he really do that? I asked. After all the confessions? Adferent. Technically, he could claim he testified under duress or stress. It's an unlikely line of defense, but still possible, especially if they have a really good lawyer. I closed my eyes, feeling fatigue wash over me. Well, I said finally, we'll deal with problems as they come. The important thing is that my land is safe, right? Right, Taylor confirmed. Na Francho, we've already filed all the necessary paperwork to secure your property from any future encroachment. No one else will be able to claim it without your personal presence and notarized consent. Thank you, Taylor, for everything. You're welcome, Russell. Hang in there. I know it's hard to see someone close to you make the wrong choice. The next day, I got an email from Aiden. Not electronic, but a real paper letter delivered by post. In the envelope was a single sheet, written in familiar handwriting. Dear Dad, Aiden wrote, I know you've probably already heard about Perry and I's decision, and you're probably judging me for it. I'm not asking for understanding or forgiveness. I just want to explain. I'm a weak man, Dad. I always have been. I can't start over like you suggested. I don't have your strength, your determination, your character. Perry, for all her faults, is a known evil. Life with her isn't easy, but it's a life I'm used to. I will not change my testimony. I told the truth to the police and the prosecutor's office, and that truth will remain on the record. But publicly, I have to support my wife. That is my choice, and I am willing to take responsibility for it. I realize that I am probably ending our relationship for good with this decision. I'm sorry it has to end this way. I've always admired you, even if I didn't show it, and part of me will always be that boy who swore to protect the trees on our land. Goodbye, Father. I'm sorry I didn't live up to your hopes, Aiden. I reread the letter over and over until the lines began to blur before my eyes. Not from crying, just from fatigue. Tired of betrayal, of disappointment, of realizing that some bonds, even the most seemingly unbreakable ones, could be broken forever. Over the weekend, I went to my plot of land. For the first time in a long time. I walked the paths I'd once tread with my father and then with Aiden. I sat by the lake where we'd once fished. The trees rustled overhead, sunlight streaming through the foliage, creating an intricate pattern on the ground. This land was part of my family's history, a history that seemed to be wrapping itself around me. Aiden would have no children to pass this legacy on to, and he himself had given it up for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a tool to accomplish her goals. The bitter realization that my only son was too weak to take my side filled my heart with a weight. But at the same time, I felt a strange relief. It was as if the weight of uncertainty had been lifted from my shoulders, and I could finally see the situation clearly, without illusions or false hopes. I was alone, but I was free. From manipulation, from betrayal, from having to constantly look around to see if they were going through my things, or forging my signature, or scheming behind my back. I could enjoy my life, my home, my land in peace, and maybe that was enough.